into a lost story, a lost mom of two young boys, that is.
Plus a key witness, Deborah, who asks the police to pray with her before she tells them what she knows. And All New 2020 starts right now.
She was a wonderful mother. She loved her boys more than anything, more than her own life.
A young woman who's a parent suddenly had disappeared.
Was there anything suspicious in the car?
And we saw in the back seat there were car seats, for the two boys.
But to disappear without them, that was impossible. That was not Laura.
She drops off the map. This wasn't going to be just a normal missing person.
Oh, baby, don't go. Oh, baby, don't leave me.
He knew how to charm a lady and charm the crowd alike.
Oh, I don't want to leave you lonely.
And then it wasn't too much longer later that Amanda came into the picture.
What did Grant tell your mom about Laura?
That she was crazy, she was mentally unstable.
He lied.
And here was a document that said she sold her kids for $25,000.
And they were like, well, Laura's missing. And I was like, wait a freaking second. Are you sure?
What are you thinking at this point?
Something is really wrong.
You've got to be sick and deranged.
What would drive anybody to commit such a crime?
Wherever she is, her heart is breaking.
The search continues.
There's been cases I investigate, I don't even remember. But then there's some that while you're in the midst of it, this one was just different.
Oyster Creek is notorious for alligators.
It's just a long, meandering creek.
It's a small creek, slow moving in that area.
Very dark, murky, muddy water.
Has zero visibility.
It's heavily wooded. There's a lot of lily pads.
All the lily pads literally took off the creek.
It was the perfect place to get rid of what they wanted to get rid of.
This is Oyster Creek, a quiet spot about 30 miles outside Houston, Texas. On a hot, steamy July day, just like this one, back in 2011, police divers were scouring these murky waters, searching for clues in the disappearance of a young mom. But Laura Ackerson was last heard from 1,200 miles away from here, in North Carolina.
Wednesday, July 13th at 4:19 p.m.
Hi, ladies. Laura. I'll be here in about an hour, but I'm going to go visit with my boys. Don't know what's going to happen as far as I'm concerned.
Laura left that voicemail for a friend she promised to visit later that night. Meanwhile, another friend and business partner, Siobhan Mathis, was also waiting to hear from her.
It was just very odd that it was going straight to her voicemail, because she always had that phone on. I walked to her house, but it's gated and locked, and you can't get in, but I can see into the garage, and her car wasn't there.
Then she sends her an email. I'm really worried. If you don't get up with me, I'm going to call the police.
Siobhan was getting more and more worried with every passing second. And she decided to report Laura missing.
I don't want to think the worst, but it's almost like what else is there to think?
Police in Raleigh, North Carolina start looking into Laura Ackerson's background. They find out she's a small-town girl from Michigan. Roger Ackerson was her dad.
She was curious. She wanted to learn things. She'd crawl up in my lap with a book, want me to read to her.
Laura's parents divorced when she was just a toddler. As she grew older, it was clear she had a bright spark.
Full of dreams. She could see beyond the end of her nose, where a lot of people can't.
Everybody she met, she would always see the good in everyone.
She didn't become the valedictorian of her high school class because she didn't want to do all the work. But a couple of years down the road, she said, boy, I wish I had.
After high school, she moved to North Carolina and landed a waitressing job. That's where she met Heidi Schumacher.
We were working at Applebee's together. Her first day, I was training her. I,
was a little snippety at her, and she said, "You're not going to talk to me like that. Nobody had ever stood up to me before." And I said, "Oh, you know what?" I smiled at her and I said, "Well, let's go out tonight. We're going to be great friends."
And then, when Laura turned 23, she had an announcement to make.
And she was like, "Oh my gosh, I have a surprise for you." And I said, "Okay, well, happy birthday," because it was on her birthday. And I was like, "Okay, what is the surprise?" She's like, "Okay, it's a guy." And I said, "Oh, all right, surprise, it's a guy."
So hypnotized, shoes on the floor, food in the pan. What makes a man?
Grant Hayes was a aspiring musical artist.
Show me one man, I'll show you a man.
He was known to Raleigh area.
Talk to her sweetly, tell her no lie.
Raleigh is a place we call the New South. It's a great mix of people coming from all over the country, raising their families. It's big enough that you have a city atmosphere, but it also has some small town values.
Downtown Raleigh is kind of burgeoning, and so there are all these, new bars and restaurants, and he was a musical act who would play at a lot of these places.
Are you still with me when I'm gone? Are you still with me when I don't come?
People liked his music. People liked his vibe.
Grant Hayes, we love you!
And she said, "We share a birthday. We're so connected." She thought it was some sort of cosmic intervention, that they were supposed to meet and they were supposed to be together.
We were always together, and the nighttime we'd go outside.
And she was smitten. She was. And he was, he's a nice-looking guy. He's charismatic. And so seeing that, I think maybe a little bit of starstruck.
I grew up in the pew, little Grant III, watching my father preach, and my mother would sing. And they've always been a huge inspiration.
Grant was known by his last name, Hayes. He thought he could get some more buzz by changing Hayes to Haze, Hayes.
She was kind of in awe of what he did. See, he would go to bars and he'd take his guitar and he'd sing songs.
I'm working with some iconic figures in history, music history. Little Richard, godfather of rock and roll.
Laura and Grant fell in love very quickly.
She goes, my surprise is that I just got married. And I said, "Oh my gosh, awesome." She just was a spur of the moment kind of person, so it didn't really surprise me, I guess, that she would just meet somebody and get married to them. And she was like ecstatic at that moment.
Laura got pregnant very early on, and she had a little boy named Grant, the fourth. Always referred to as Little Grant.
What she told me after she delivered the baby was that she was very happy because when Grant walked in and saw him, he fell in love with the baby.
Oh, baby, don't go. Oh, baby, don't leave me.
Heidi was not a fan of Grant Hayes, and she was very clear about that.
We've had hateful tension between us since the moment we met. And she said, "Why can't you just be happy for me?" I said, "I know, but I just got this really bad feeling from him." And, and she would say that I was just trying to protect her, and I was just being an overprotective friend and, all that. And so I backed off.
Soon, an opportunity in the Caribbean takes Laura and Grant's lives in very different directions.
Party, stay out late, stay up all night. They were kind of living two separate lives.
There was something simmering underneath that in the relationship. There may have been trouble there in paradise.
St. John is a really quaint, quiet island. It's about 4,000 people.
It's a magical place. It's a fantastic place. It's got an affluent clientele that goes there because 80% of the island's national park. Can't even be developed.
There is no airport. The only way to this island is by boat. You're going to take your flight to St. Thomas, and you're going to have to take a passenger ferry.
St. St. John's attracts musicians from all over. Kenny Chesney owns a home here, and a local island hangout helped inspire his song, When I See This Bar.
Yeah, that's what I see when I see this bar.
Grant had an audience. People liked his music here in Raleigh, but he thought he could take the next step in his career with music by going to the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Jose, who asked us only to use his first name, booked musicians into the bars and nightclubs on the island.
My phone rang, and it was Grant. He explained that he was looking to make sure that he could get enough gigs to support his basic costs of living. I promised him that I could get him 5 shows a week.
So he packed up and went down there.
He did speak of his son and Laura, and that she was going to eventually come down here once he got settled.
The Caribbean could be very seductive with the night air, the breezes, the music, the sand. When the sun goes down is when it really comes alive.
He knew how to work his crowd and play the right music for the people in the audience.
And I was listening to him play, and I really liked his sound. You know the artist Sade? He was like a male version of her. It just kind of a groovy, smooth vibe.
Show me a man, I'll show you a man.
He definitely had some similarities to someone like Darius Rucker.
I want to love, and I want to give you more.
I owned a bar on the island of St. John. How I first encountered Grant Hayes, he was playing, I believe it was at the Parrot Club. He was taking a break. He said, man, I really dig your sound. I'll bring some people from my bar down. And he says, really? From your bar? Yeah. You know, but they won't be spending money with you if they're not at your bar. They'll have a good time.
Are you still with me when I'm gone? Are you still with me?
He was just waiting for that one guy to come in that's on vacation that might be with a record company. To actually identify and recognize that this guy has talent and let's make him an offer.
But for now, he had to make do with paychecks of $150 to $200 per gig.
It looked from the outside looking in that Laura and Grant had a great relationship. No one really knew the trouble brewing.
He was very possessive. It was like he owned her.
Grant didn't want her to have a relationship with her brother. He did not want any close relationships except for the one with him.
Well, she had pretty effectively been isolated from everyone else in her life. I mean, he would take her self-esteem and just crush it into the ground. I, got to the door and she answered and she had a bloody nose and a, almost black eye already. I tried to get the girl to the hospital or file a police report or anything. No, he won't do it again. It's okay. It's going to be okay. I'm not going to press charges. It's fine.
She's an optimist. She thought, well, he may change eventually. Always looking for the better side of him.
Grant denied ever hitting Laura. Now she's planning to join him on St. John. But then she says she receives a stark warning from family and friends.
I told her, don't go back. You don't need to go back to that.
She really realized, man, I have to leave him. And I said, okay. And then we had a plan for her to leave, and she had gotten sick 3 or 4 mornings in a row. And she was pregnant. I said, you can still leave. You can still go. And she said, no, I have to tell him it's the right thing to do.
It would have been easy. Just stay here. But instead she went back.
She was going to do whatever it took to make that family work. She went down to St. John to start over, and she had told me that he said, oh, when you come down here, it's going to be great.
Now reunited on the island of St. John, Laura gives birth to their second son in August of 2009. They name him Gentle.
And then you have Gentle, because now in my maturity, I'm understanding what real masculinity is, and it's gentle.
She was a wonderful mother. She loved her boys more than anything, more than her own life.
She was a good mother, and she laid low and was a housewife. She wasn't into the party. They were kind of living two separate lives, and that's one of the reasons why he would hang out at my house, just so that he could do what he wanted and be himself, because he couldn't do that at home. Party, stay out late, stay up all night.
I never saw him like walk over and kiss her on the cheek or any of that. There wasn't that kind of in-person tenderness between them that I ever saw.
The little baby, Gentle, needed some medical attention and thought that here in North Carolina would be a better place to get him the medical care he needed.
So she made plans to move back to take care of her boy.
Laura had left the island and he was kind of on his own. That wasn't really good for him because then he could just really do whatever he wanted. He knew how to charm a lady and charm the crowd alike. So it wasn't hard for him to have a group of ladies to chat with after he stopped playing. And he had no problem getting them to blush and getting a phone number.
And sure enough, another woman soon makes waves in Grant's island life.
Amanda, to me, was a striking woman.
And Laura became concerned and suspicious and had a huge surprise coming her way. It appeared that things were going well in St. John. Grant was trying to get his music career going there.
Midnight train, don't give a ride to the north.
And Laura, she's living here in North Carolina with the two little boys, trying to get their youngest son needed medical treatment.
And then it wasn't too much longer later that Amanda came into the picture. Amanda, to me, was a striking woman.
Amanda's daughter, Shay, shared a lot of details with us, but she asked that we not use her last name. And what was your relationship like growing up?
My mom was my best friend. My mom was my hero. Like, what do you want to be whenever you grow up? I want to be like my mom.
Amanda had been married 3 times previously, and the most recent husband before Grant was a wealthy businessman in Texas. And he actually died in an accident. After his death, there's a lot of money that Amanda inherits.
Her big claim to fame was in acting. She was in the actual Stepford Wives, the remake that was done with Nicole Kidman, and she had a very small part.
So how did she end up in St. John?
She went down there on vacation. She was supposed to be gone for 2 weeks.
She loved it so much. She moved down to the Virgin Islands. That was where she wanted to live.
You lived there with her?
I did.
How old were you at that point?
I was 20.
And so how did she meet Grant Hayes?
He was playing music.
So it brought some people down there to listen to Grant play, and Amanda come in. She was looking at him like she hadn't eaten in a while, and he was a steak.
Who pursued whom?
The tango is two-sided.
And did you see their infatuation, romance unfold?
It wasn't instant. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, fireworks, oh.
I definitely started seeing him hanging with Amanda, and it was obvious that they were a couple.
I called him out for it. I said, man, you can't be doing this with her up in the States. You know, Lori up in the States. He goes, oh, no, we're getting divorced. And it's over. She's staying up there. She's never coming back to the island.
What was Grant's relationship like with Amanda?
Yeah, I think with Amanda, because she was a little bit older, more mature, I don't think that she was sort of pushed around and controlled.
Yeah, very territorial. Let's say there's a group of females in there, and one was, Grant and her were having too much eye contact and smiles, whatever. Then Amanda, being over here, would have the server bring her a drink, so that's from Grant's girlfriend. To kind of set her territory.
And Laura, from a distance here in North Carolina, became concerned and suspicious there was something else happening there. Eventually, this relationship between Amanda and Grant takes the next step. It develops into something more. And they make the move from the Virgin Islands to New York.
She convinced him that she can introduce him to the people that can make his career take off.
Was he successful?
I mean, he got repeat bookings at some of the different places. You know, he played the Grant Hayes variety show.
Gotta get a warm welcome for Mr. Grant Hayes!
I don't know. I ain't trying to.
And then Grant says, to Laura, I would really like little Grant, their oldest son, to come visit me in New York.
Grant is shorter. This is just for 10 days. 10 days came and went, and he hasn't brought Grant back. And Laura was asking why. You said you would.
And Laura had to file for custody to even see her son again. She didn't have a choice.
Fighting to get her oldest boy back. In April of 2010, Laura hears surprising news.
Grant calls her and says, Amanda and I just went to Vegas and we got married. It's a bombshell. It's a shock to Laura.
It was a little surprising that they were getting married. They were definitely moving very fast.
I married my soulmate, my best friend, and she is something that I wanted my whole life.
Friends and family had been given the impression that Laura and Grant were married, but apparently they never were.
Then Grant took a very aggressive move and went to court without her.
He made these allegations about she's mentally unstable, she doesn't have a stable home, she's working as an escort.
They had alleged that Laura was a danger to the children.
He lied. He said several things in the ex parte custody order that just plain weren't true.
And based on those allegations, Mr. Hayes got Judge Turner to sign an emergency custody order.
He granted a temporary custody to Grant, not just little Grant, but also Gentle. And little Gentle was carted off from there and given over to his father.
The worst time in her life was when she did not get to see her kids. She was devastated.
She went to work to do whatever it would take to get the two boys back.
As for Grant and Amanda, they moved down to Raleigh as the custody battle heats up.
We had the court appoint Dr. Ginger Calloway.
Where do you practice?
In Raleigh.
To evaluate both parties.
To be able to give the court an opinion over whose home may be the best home for these children to be in.
During that evaluation, Laura went on the record to say that Grant had isolated and controlled her, while Grant charged that she was the one manipulating him.
When the psychologist report came in, the parts about Mr. Hayes referred to him having some, what the psychologist called, illogical and disturbed thinking.
He rages angrily about Laura in front of the children. It is obvious they do not want Laura included in the children's lives. This is very concerning because, in essence, they want to obliterate her.
And she came basically to the conclusion that, Laura had work to do.
She is less mature than other adults and is easily overwhelmed.
The psychologist did recommend a 50-50 split in custody, and that would have been a substantial improvement for where we were.
In the meantime, Amanda had gotten pregnant.
Lily in Love.
Lily in Love?
Yes.
And gave birth to a little baby girl.
All right.
They were thrilled to welcome baby Lily into the world, joining Grant's two sons. But that was overshadowed by Grant's struggles to break through in the music business.
Between the legal proceedings and I think Grant's spending, they're out of money.
It was a mess.
Yes.
He was the reason that my mom was not okay. Sitting in a bathroom floor crying, going, I have no idea how the hell I'm going to do this. I mean, what do? You've gone through over $200,000 in 18 months.
That's how much money they went through?
Easily.
How dire was the financial situation?
Oh, they were getting evicted from their apartment.
Grant called his mom, Patsy, and said, hey, we need to move in with you.
Hey, Mom, it's Grant. Me and Amanda and Lily are going to move in with you guys. I don't have the money for a storage building right now. If you could fund that to me, okay? All right, bye-bye.
It's now July of 2011, and while Grant and Amanda sink, Laura's fortunes were finally rising.
Her main priority in life was to get her kids back. She went back to school. She, got her own place, got her own job, got her own car.
She was very enthusiastic about the career and getting her boys back.
Laura even started a new company with her friend Siobhan, selling ad space on restaurant menus. She successfully pitched local restaurant owners and socialized with new friends.
I am going to Raleigh. I don't know if I'll be able to see it before 7, but I want to find out if they're going to be available after that at any point. So that's there.
Laura sounds upbeat, but she has no idea that she's now driving straight into terrible danger. It's July 2011. Laura Ackerson hasn't been heard from in days, and her friends are worried about the 27-year-old mother of two. They report her missing.
ABC 11 Eyewitness News at 5:30 starts right now.
So far, there's been no other signs of the missing woman.
I'm not the only person that's worried about her.
She's been missing for quite a while, but, there's still hope.
Ackerson apparently came to Raleigh last week on business.
We got a description of Laura's vehicle, and we put a bolo out, be on the lookout for patrol officers just to see if they are able to locate the vehicle.
That night, by 11 o'clock that night, our patrol guys had found the car.
So where was it?
Right over here, if you see this black color SUV, it's right there in that same parking space is where it was.
Was there anything suspicious in the car?
Nothing really of evidentiary value. I mean, we saw in the back seat there were car seats, for the two boys. There was an idea that maybe she decided, hey, I'm going to go to the airport, I'm going to take a trip somewhere.
If she had disappeared with her boys, that would not have been an overwhelming surprise. But to disappear without them, that wasn't possible. That was not Laura.
So we definitely explored that possibility. We checked Laura's financials, we checked her cell phone records, all that. All her activity ended on July 13th.
She's not buying gas, she's not buying food, she's doing nothing. She just completely goes silent.
Something that we would normally do in a missing person case is we want to go to their apartment or their house. Maybe they left a note.
The police go into Laura's apartment and thoroughly search it, looking for anything that could point to a problem or that any violence occurred.
It was very well kept. It was clean. She had several plants that were inside the apartment. None of them had been watered for numerous days.
That was a good indication that she had not returned or that nobody was coming in and out of the apartment to take care of things. From looking at the apartment, you could tell she's definitely a dedicated mother. That's what stood out, number one.
Almost half the apartment was dedicated to space for the kids, and that kind of reflected her life, that, so much of her life was focused on her children.
They pulled the video from the public spaces of Laura's apartment building.
The video captured the hallway outside of her door on the morning of the 13th. Just a lady that was on her way to work in the morning by herself. Completely normal morning.
She was not under duress, did not seem to be in a hurry, did not have suitcases that she's dragging behind her.
We learned that Gentle had a birthday party the following weekend that was scheduled, and that Laura had no-showed on it. That's all when we started thinking this wasn't going to be just a normal missing person.
We still want to look, hey, are there other people in Laura's life that may have something to do with her disappearance?
Laura admitted that she'd gone to some sugar daddy sites.
You're trying to meet maybe wealthier men. We were never able to show that there was any meeting of any kind between Laura and somebody else.
One detective reaches out to Laura's ex, Grant Hayes, who says that Laura had visited him on the night of Wednesday, July 13th.
He gives timeline of when she was there at the apartment. Well, she actually came up here to visit the boys and says that she left, after being there for a little while.
Grant Hayes also tells investigators that 2 days after visiting his apartment, Laura was supposed to meet him at the local Sheetz gas station for their scheduled custody exchange.
He shows up to the scheduled Friday 5 o'clock time. He has the boys with him.
They would come in the store to use the restroom. Grant goes in to buy a pack of cigarettes. But essentially, they're waiting in the parking lot.
And waits for over an hour for Laura to arrive. And she never arrives.
He was sending out very angry email messages and text messages to Laura. You're late again. Where are you?
And first at 5:30 tonight, we have new details and new updates on the big stories happening now. I'm Steve Daniels. I anchor the evening news covering Raleigh. This was a really compelling case. Our viewers were watching this every step of the way.
She was to meet them and their father in Wilson that afternoon, according to the children's grandmother.
She didn't show up at 5, and so he was there until 5, and he called me at 6:30 and said she had not shown up yet.
It's distressing, and I just hope it all comes to an end quickly and that she's all right.
It's not like her to do something like this, especially to not pick up her kids.
Detectives realize that no one has heard from Laura since that voicemail she left on July 13th for her friend, Oksana Smarsky.
I was in a study group and I saw my phone ring and I wish I would pick it up. And if I knew what would happen, I would not let it ring.
I'll give you a call when I'm done, and I just wanted to let you know too, I don't know if I'll be able to see you before 7, but that's later.
Laura's destination that night had been Grant and Amanda's apartment. Tell me, where is the apartment?
And so their apartment is right on the other side of this small building here.
So how did you get a search warrant to go in?
So we had developed enough information, I just think, to get that search warrant initially. We were really trying to develop a timeline for Laura. Any evidence that maybe Laura had been there.
So one of the things that we did find in the apartment was a note. It appeared to be handwritten.
Up on the counter in the kitchen area, just kind of laying there very conspicuously, which was weird.
And what that note said was that Laura Ackerson, in exchange for receiving $25,000, would give up custody of her children.
It was signed Laura Ackerson.
That was suspicious, because everybody had been telling the police Laura would not leave her boys.
Those boys were Laura's life. She would have never signed over her children for any amount of money.
Why a note? You already are going through the court system. Why don't you just go through your attorneys?
And that is not the only curious discovery in that apartment.
As soon as they opened the door, hit with the overwhelming smell of bleach.
It's been a week since Laura Ackerson's disappearance, and investigators are now searching the apartment of her ex, Grant Hayes.
Police were here yesterday asking a lot of questions.
It's a 3-bedroom apartment. There's a small kitchen area.
I remember there being a couch, maybe a table, but there's not a lot of furniture.
Was there anything unusual about that moment when you walked in the door?
It smelled like bleach. You know, it's just that strong odor of bleach that hits you.
And so, what did that tell you?
At least that someone had been cleaning is what it appeared, but then we see this large, bleach stain.
At that point, alarm bells are going off.
Right.
And that's not like a little old stain.
No, a significant bleach stain right at the entryway in the apartment.
It was clear something happened right here at this door that required them to bleach this carpet.
And then there were a couple other things that we find that kind of throw up red flags as well.
The bathroom, which before July 13th had been the place where the little boys went to brush their teeth, take their baths, play in the bathtub. Suddenly, there was nothing in that room.
It's the cleanest bathroom I've ever been in.
There's no floor mats, there's no shower curtain.
And shiny clean on every possible surface.
And what does that point to?
that something has taken place inside this bathroom that required cleaning. And I think it really stuck out too because the rest of the home, it wasn't super dirty, but it was not clean to the level that that bathroom was clean.
Clearly, something happened in that bathroom.
We did everything that you could do to a bathroom. We tore it apart. We ripped up the floor. We took out the plumbing and did everything that you could do forensically at that time. We even went to the apartment below, came up through the ceiling to get the plumbing, and nothing. There was nothing. There was no blood. Laura's body was not there. Nothing broken to indicate a struggle. So we still are kind of on the fence of what do we have here?
So investigators now have a lot more questions for Grant and Amanda. But first, they have to find them.
Detective Falk had learned that Amanda had a daughter. Her name was Shay. And Detective Falk conducted an interview with her.
The police show up at your door. What was that like?
Terrifying. I've never had a speeding ticket before. I've never been in trouble before.
And so what did you tell them?
Well, they wanted to know where my mom was. And I was like, what do you mean, where is my mom? And I was like, what is this about? And they were like, well, Laura's missing. And I was like, wait a freaking second. You guys need to find my mom. And I need you to find out where the babies are because they are probably not okay.
Where Shay tells us, my mom and Grant, they took off and they went down to Texas.
Grant and Amanda were loading the kids up and making a trip to Texas to visit Amanda's sister, Karen Berry.
She was going to go visit my aunt because my grandmother had just died and she hadn't seen her sister in years, and told my mom, I was like, I want to go with you. And she told me no.
Amanda's daughter Shay tells police Grant rented a U-Haul trailer at this location on July 16th. That's 3 days after Laura went missing. Now what investigators want to know is why.
So after finding that, I requested surveillance video from U-Haul here in Raleigh.
Why'd they rent a U-Haul trailer? Well, according to Shay, there's this kind of antique hutch that she was going to give to my aunt.
At this point, Grant and Amanda were downsizing their belongings as they were getting ready to move.
I guess that Grant was like, take it to your sister's, it'll be safe there.
Did that sound odd to you?
I mean, we've had this piece of furniture for like 20 years. Why are you worried about where it's going to be now? But whatever.
Grant makes a comment when he goes to get the U-Haul trailer that he's going on a fishing trip with his son.
The police wanted to know where Grant was, and so they checked his cell phone pings and found out that he was in Texas.
One of the first pings that we get on Amanda's cell phone is her sister Karen Berry's house.
The court ordered that they were not allowed to take Grant and Gentle out of the state of North Carolina until the whole custody situation is resolved.
It was definitely significant to us that he was willing to take the risk and go to Texas with these boys, knowing that if that was found out, that would be a problem for him.
Pretty immediately, we make a decision, hey, we've got to go to Texas.
This is literally a 20-hour drive on a hunch that we could find evidence out there. So Skinner Lane is in the middle of nowhere. 2 deputies, myself, drove to Karen Berry's house cold. She didn't know we were coming. We told her that basically we wanted to talk to her about Grant and Amanda. She told us that she was expecting us.
She was very, very nervous.
She cried a lot, and she said, before I answer any more questions, do you mind if I pray?
And it means there's something big that you're about to tell us.
And as a homicide detective, anytime somebody wants to pray, you let them pray. My first reaction was, whew, this just got real.
It was the lead story on the news night after night after night.
Grant shows up to the Friday handoff
and waits for over an hour for Laura to arrive, and she never arrives.
I can't imagine being under that Texas sun trying to find the woman's body. It was just a grotesque thing to have to do.
And you would have to dive through murky water like this?
It's not a swimming hole. It's not a place where people go paddling in. This is just sort of a wasteland.
You found a manual for the power saw. What went through your mind?
No one does construction work in this house.
And I'm just buying a saw at 2 o'clock in the morning.
How the hell did we get here?
As soon as prosecutors hear this song, they're like, wow.
It was a song.
Not real life.
Until it is real life.
When Laura first went missing, this case sort of blew up. A young woman who's a parent who suddenly had disappeared, and she really disappeared off the face of the earth.
At this point in the investigation, we really don't know what exactly has happened to Laura.
Grant and Amanda had gone down to Texas to visit Amanda's sister. They rented a U-Haul trailer.
We knew that Grant and Amanda had come back to Raleigh.
Where is Laura Ackerson? That's what everyone's been wondering since she went missing days ago. Raleigh police finally have what could be a breakthrough lead, so they drive 1,200 miles to pay an unexpected visit to Amanda's sister, here in Richmond, Texas.
Karen Berry was Amanda's sister, but in a lot of ways she was more of a mother figure. She was who Amanda always turned to when she had any problems.
Well, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I received a call out advising that the Raleigh Police Department had traveled from North Carolina, and they were requesting some investigative assistance from the sheriff's office.
When they knock on the door of Karen Berry and she answers, it's almost like she was counting the minutes for them to get there. And her first reaction to them is, you can come in and I'll talk to you, but can I just have a moment to pray first?
There's some soul searching going on.
Yes.
And do you remember the words that she prayed?
Basically just a prayer of, give me the strength to do the right thing, to help me do what I need to do.
After she finished praying, she tells us that Grant and Amanda had shown up on Monday the 18th. She's excited to see her sister. Lily had just been born, and Karen had never seen her. She had never met Grant.
Karen didn't get a very good impression of Grant because he was hyper nervous.
Grant slept most of the day. Karen pointed that out.
And she could tell something was wrong with her sister.
Amanda seemed troubled, but also concerning were several inquiries that Amanda and Grant had made of her and her boys.
What were the peculiar questions?
Well, one was about the creek. Just across the street is Oyster Creek. Karen's boys, they had a flat-bottom boat. Grant and Amanda, they were asking permission to use the boat to go out there to explore for sharks. Well, we're 90 miles inland, and this is a freshwater creek. I'm pretty confident there's never been a sighting of a shark in Fort Bend County.
Grant asked, are there alligators where I can access Oyster Creek?
And then they talk about they want to go fishing. They'll take the boat out fishing.
And Karen said, no, that is not a place that you need little toddlers fishing.
Karen told the police that they took the boat out one night. She didn't know why. The boys were sound asleep. So it didn't make any sense to her.
We conveyed to her repeatedly that we are not looking at her as a suspect. And then we directed the conversation toward Laura. Did Grant and Amanda tell you anything? She clearly conveyed to me that Laura and Amanda did not get along. And then she told us Amanda had come into the kitchen and said, I need to talk with you outside. It's important. Amanda said Laura's not a good person. Amanda then tells Karen, I hurt her. I hurt Laura. I pushed her, and it's bad. We asked her, do you think that Laura's dead? And Karen said, I think that there's a good chance. And at that point, she gave us consent to search the property.
The scene was immediately cordoned off. There were several areas on the property itself that we needed to search. in addition to searching the creek across the street.
This creek is off of Skinner Lane, off in Corbin County. We're about 100 yards west of the 4300 block.
It looks different now, right?
Yeah, things have changed a lot in the last 13 years.
There were big piles of trash all in the backyard. There was a hog pen to the right of the house.
You uncovered a lot of evidence here.
We did. We uncovered a lot of evidence. Karen was asked what items were left behind. Are these yours, or are these something that you know nothing about? We found some empty carry-on suitcases, presumably left by Grant or Amanda. We found some ice chests.
Karen was not aware that they came down there with 3 coolers until she saw Grant cleaning them out in the backyard.
If these were ice chests that were needed for their long journey to Texas from Raleigh, why weren't they needed during the long journey back?
Fort Bend police call in crime scene investigator Officer Kim Oreskovich. They want her to search that muddy creek across the street from Karen Barry's house.
When I got here is when Lieutenant told me that, hey, you're looking for a body.
And so what was going through your mind?
I was like, no, we're not going to find it. If there was dumped here in the creek, normally the current would take it out.
The creek was probably 25 feet wide, very swampy looking.
It's not a swimming hole. It's not a place where people go paddling in. This is just sort of a wasteland. There are alligators. They had someone in the boat ready to shoot an alligator.
We're down, obviously, on our knees in the boat, so he's literally above us, watching for gators in front of us, see if there's any signs of a gator coming out.
With a long gun in his hand.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine being under that Texas sun trying to find a woman's body. It's just a grotesque thing to have to do.
What did you see?
We're like, okay, there's something big floating on top of the water in the water lilies.
My first reaction was, whew, this just got real.
From the water to the riverbed, the search for Laura Ackerson continues. Laura's body believed to be dumped here in Texas.
It was a hot July day when you went out on the boat.
Yes.
What did you see?
We found something big floating on top of the water in the water lilies. And it was just white and pinkish. When we got up close to it, you could see that it's one half of a torso. When they said, oh, you're looking for a body, I wasn't expecting dismembered body, so that was a shock to your system.
Kim pretty quickly locates what ultimately was determined to be 2 portions of a torso kind of tangled up in the vegetation of the creek.
And that kind of confirmed to everybody here, now this is a homicide.
Once those dismembered body parts were found floating near the surface of Oyster Creek, Houston dive teams were called in. They had to search now beneath the surface of these murky, alligator-filled waters, looking for more remains. They need to know, is it really Laura?
It's becoming important to find things like the hands or the feet or the head that can help with identifying the body.
Mark Thorson and Brian Davis of the Houston Police Dive Team still remember being on scene that awful day. What kind of dives did you normally do on this unit?
And we pretty much go get anything out of the water. Vehicles, guns, bodies.
And what's visibility like underwater?
Most of our dives on the dive team, we do not have visibility.
You're basically just fanning your hand out or your arm out in front of you. You want to feel it before you run over it. The first 2 hours, we searched underwater. We didn't come up with anything, so we had to change our tactic, and that's when we decided to go on our tiptoes and go through the lily pads.
And you would have to dive through murky water like this?
Yes. This is what we were facing. When you're in the middle of it, it just closes in back on. It closes in on you, and it's difficult searching, or it's hard searching for what we're looking for.
We started seeing sheen and smelling. If you've ever smelled a decomposing body, you know that odor, and you're not going to forget it. We're moving the lilies, and the scent would get stronger, or it would get weaker. As we're moving the lilies, you can see a white, grayish object in the water, and immediately knew that I had a body parted. All I saw was what looked like skin, and I could see a bone. I called out to Mark. Mark swam over, and he placed his hands on top of mine and rolled it, and that was when we learned that we had the head.
We recovered virtually all of her body, but the most important piece was being able to recover her head, because we were able to do dental record comparisons where that's as good as a fingerprint.
They were able to confirm that it was Laura Ackerson, and that mother of 2 boys was now dead.
And they knew they had found Laura in the Texas creek. Sorry.
What was your reaction when you heard about body parts being found in a creek near your aunt's house, and somehow your mom's mixed up in it?
It was the most devastating thing to have ever happened in my life.
In my interviews with Karen, I was aware that Grant and Amanda were inquiring about where a Home Depot was at. They had some shopping that they wanted to do.
Investigators visit a local Home Depot and uncover this video of Grant purchasing suspicious items, including muriatic acid.
We had video evidence of the purchase of the muriatic acid, garbage can, and also some large cuff neoprene chemical-resistant gloves.
A Home Depot employee told law enforcement that Grant had asked if the acid would eliminate the odor from a hog pen.
We searched the hog pen, and we noticed a larger darkened spot, circular spot, right in the middle of the hog pen. In getting close to the soil, you could smell the chemical smell of presumably muriatic acid.
So what do you think happened there?
They attempted to dispose of Laura in that hog pen.
Destroy her
Yes.
physical remains.
Or at least means of identifying her.
Despite having found Laura's body parts, the police still don't know how she was killed. But they do have enough evidence for arrest warrants for Grant and Amanda.
We head down to Kinston to arrest Grant and Amanda at their parents' house. And we take them into custody.
Grant left a note on the dresser of his parents' house, and it said that he grants sole custody of Grant, Gentle, and Lily to his parents. He had to know that he was in a dangerous position.
Both Grant Hayes and his wife Amanda are now in jail.
Hayes and his wife Amanda are both charged with murder in the death of Laura Ackerson. Both pleaded not guilty.
I even sent him a message. I said, Grant, what the hell, dude? What are you doing? Why? You know? I don't know if he ever read he was incarcerated at that point.
What was your reaction to her arrest and being charged with murder?
Shocked. How the hell did we get here?
I can't imagine a daughter watching her mother be arrested and charged with murder and have to contend with that.
It's soul-shattering. It makes you question your morals and values. It makes you question who you are.
Soon, authorities find even more evidence they say will bolster their case. When you see the surveillance video, what went through your mind?
It's scary. It's barbaric. It's inhumane.
Soon after their arrest, Grant and Amanda are led into the courtroom.
Are you Grant Ruffin Hayes?
Yes. Jason Ackerson watched from the front row as the father of his sister's children faced a judge. Grant Hayes III is now charged with killing his children's mother. They have also charged his wife, Amanda Hayes, with murder. Today, both Hayes and his wife went back to jail with no bond.
These guys are monsters.
My mom's not a monster. She got pulled into a bad situation. that woman in that picture is not the mama that I grew up with.
Shay, she didn't think her mother could be responsible for anything violent.
At some point, she had found this owner's manual for a skill saw.
You found a manual for the power saw.
For some type of power saw.
What went through your mind?
No one does construction work in this house. And I don't see anything freshly built.
She made a decision to kind of help us.
I figured if they had the manual, they could figure out where he bought it. And they did.
It was Walmart that tells us, yeah, we actually sold one on the early morning hours of July 14th.
They found Grant Hayes at 2:30 in the morning after Laura Ackerson was last seen on the 13th at Walmart buying supplies, plastic, gloves, PPE, plus a reciprocating saw.
A reciprocating saw, depending on the blade you use, can rip through almost anything.
The video shows him kind of pacing back and forth and looking at the different saws. You know, you wonder, like, what's going through his mind as he's doing this.
He went in, he didn't disguise himself. He didn't try to cover up his looks, didn't try to dodge cameras.
He's very cool and calm and collected, knowing that he's got a dead body at home. I'm just buying a saw at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I am a retired reporter with the ABC station in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. I'm at Crump right now in Raleigh. I was the crime reporter. Early in pretrial motions, we started learning that the defense strategy for Amanda appeared to be to blame Grant. And for Grant, it appeared to be to blame Amanda.
They both throw each other under the bus.
They absolutely do. They both blame each other.
It's like a murderous he said, she said.
For sure. And it makes sense, right? If you're looking at it from a defense standpoint, for either one of them, you need to blame it on somebody else.
Once it became clear from defense motions that one defendant was going to blame the other, the judge said if we do them separately, they both get a fair trial.
Finally, 2 years after the murder of Laura Ackerson, Grant's trial begins.
I was an assistant district attorney. I prosecuted Grant and Amanda Hayes.
On July 13th of 2011, Laura Ackerson woke up excited. Little did she know that within 24 hours, that man, the father of her children, would be the one responsible for her murder and disappearance.
I represented Grant Hayes. Another attorney, Will Durham, joined me. Our defense was, Grant didn't do this, there's no evidence he did this, and all the evidence suggests that Amanda is the perpetrator of the homicide.
His attorneys made this point, and they were right. Just because Grant did a gruesome deed by disposing of a body and dismembering it doesn't mean he's a murderer.
His mindset was very much, he didn't do this, they couldn't prove it, and he would be fine.
In the 2 years since the murder, Grant Hayes has appeared in court several times. Some court observers say he often looks smug. Maybe that's because he thinks he can pin the murder of Laura Ackerson on his wife.
What was Grant's demeanor like during the trial?
Disgusting. He was so nonchalant. He had no problem. He was going to beat this.
District Attorney may call your witness.
The way the prosecution decides to begin their case is to paint a portrait of Laura Ackerson. To do that, they bring in the people who know her best.
Laura loved her children more than anything, and it showed in every action that she took. I told Laura that if she wanted to fight for her kids, I would be there to support her, and she said, I'm going to fight every step of the way.
Would you state your name, please?
Siobhan Nicole Mathis. Her main priority was to get her children back before anything else. Even when she was working, she would drop whatever she had to do for her kids.
As we watched this case unfold, it was so striking to see the extraordinary lengths Grant and Amanda went to try to cover up their crime, but they left a very clear trail behind them.
Describe the range of evidence you had to deal with.
The defendant went out and tried to find the best saw blade and the best plastic sheeting and acid. We were able to use these saw blades and had a scientist from NC State compare the saw marks in Laura's body.
You can see how the blades actually match up.
These coolers really were evidence of the deliberation and thoughtfulness that the defendant had after the murder.
Could you unfold that and display that for the jury?
Has some sort of bleach discoloration.
Electrical tape that was purchased.
Despite this mound of evidence, we don't actually know how she was murdered.
Sure, there's 3 adults in the apartment when this happened, and 2 of them are charged with first-degree murder, and, one person's dead. It was kind of hard to prove exactly what had transpired.
I didn't have enough information with the parts that we received to determine the exact cause of death.
What was your opinion as to the cause of death?
I called it undetermined homicidal violence.
The defense lawyers are telling that jury, look, there's no murder weapon. There's no exact cause of death. You can't find this guy guilty.
The issue is who killed Laura and what happened and why. And the state really didn't have any direct evidence.
This made the defense feel like there was a chink in the armor and that they had a way to get in.
But soon, prosecutors would try to use Grant's own words against him.
I got to baby. I can't get any more from you.
As soon as prosecutors hear this song, they're like, wow.
Despite the mountain of evidence in this case, it's still unclear who killed Laura and how. The prosecution is about to call a witness who claims to know what happened.
Here is jailhouse informant Pablo Trinidad, who can tell us what Grant said happened inside that apartment.
Pablo Trinidad met Grant at the Wake County Jail, where they were both behind bars. Pablo was being held for drug-related offenses.
He's the typical snitch witness. He was doing maybe 25 years. He was looking away to try to get a sentence reduction.
Were y'all housed in the same area of the jail?
Yes, ma'am. We had several conversations throughout the period that we was housed together.
Pablo Trinidad got in front of that courtroom on the witness stand, and he said, Grant told me in our jail cell he and Amanda strangled Laura.
He said he placed a call to her and lured her to his apartment. And that's when him and his wife subdued her and strangled her.
With the corroborating evidence, there was this glimmer of truth in there.
Whether you want to believe what he's saying, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You can't prove it other than, this is just my word.
Your testimony is that during that 5 days, y'all developed such a special bond that he told you all his deepest, dark secrets.
That's correct.
Defense lawyers chipped away at Pablo. They knew that Pablo had snitched on other cellmates before.
And so you started thinking back, what are all the names I can give these people, didn't you?
Yes.
And you remembered Grant Hayes. He was your meal ticket, wasn't he? One of them, at least.
If you want to put in those words, that's your words, not mine.
Thank you, sir. You missed on that.
I hate to say that a jailhouse snitch was a pivotal witness in this case, but he was.
The prosecution has one last piece of evidence, and fitting for Grant, it starts with a beat.
Shay actually brought to our attention. She knew about this song that Grant had previously recorded. It was called Broomstick Rider.
Broomstick Rider, just happened to be my baby's mama. D-Shine, you got me.
The lyrics of it told what his desire to do to Laura was.
I put a price tag on your head. That's right. You must have told your attorney I got intentions on killing you. This order might stop me. My bullets will get you.
He wrote this song with Laura in mind. His attorney called it a parody.
The state at this time could seek to publish a song that was recovered off of the defendant's iPod.
The defense objected to the song, saying it wasn't relevant, but the judge overruled and allowed it in.
Broomstick Rider, just happened to be my baby's mama.
We both kind of peer over and see the defendant bobbing his head and sort of rocking out to the song about killing the person that he was on trial for killing, which was sort of a staggering event.
It was a song. It was a song.
Not real life.
Until it is real life. And it messes up your entire existence. It messes up who you think you are at your core. Can we take a second?
The defense calls a witness with crucial first-hand testimony that seems to support Grant's version of the story. It's Amanda's sister, Karen Berry. Remember, Amanda told her sister that she hurt Laura.
Could you please state your name for the court?
Karen Berry.
Could you tell me how you know Amanda Hayes?
She's my sister.
The defense is trying to prove Grant didn't commit this crime, that it was Amanda who committed this crime.
Our case focused on statements that Amanda made to her sister.
She came in and she told me that she had hurt Laura and that she had hurt her bad.
She says, I hurt Laura, not we hurt Laura, or he hurt Laura.
It actually benefited Grant to some degree because for Grant, his defense is Amanda did this.
Well, that was definitely a defense bombshell. But when she was pressed further, she detailed another story that happened.
I said, I want the truth out of you now. And I looked her straight in the eye and I asked her if she was covering for Grant.
How did she answer?
She looked me straight in the eye. She shook her head and went.
Well, that kind of undid everything else.
The defendant's whole case sort of backfired on them. I mean, Karen's testimony did not come out like they wanted it to come out.
In their closing arguments, each side has one last chance to convince the jury.
They're trying to give you some reason to convict him without giving you the evidence. You will not let emotion decide this case. You will not let your disgust for the things that happened in this case lead you to a verdict.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
I really wanted to communicate to the jury that the way that this murder happened was different. It was more personal.
here's the saw.
And so that's why I pulled out that saw.
This saw cut someone in half.
These are the lengths that the defendant went to try to not just get away with this murder, but also erase Laura from the world.
He is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and you should find him so. Thank you.
After 3 weeks of graphic testimony with 50 witnesses and 500 pieces of evidence, the jury goes out to deliberate. Within 2 hours, they're back with a verdict.
We, the jury, by unanimous verdict, find the defendant, Grant Ruffin Hayes III, to be guilty of murder in the first degree.
Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without chance of parole.
I was happy to see that he got that, and I was happy to see that the jury felt the same way.
Glad he's not going to be part of society. It is consolation for that factor, but still doesn't bring her back.
Only a couple of months later, it's time for Amanda to face justice.
Amanda took the witness stand in her own defense.
I was just doing whatever he told me to do.
Grant did not testify, but now he's talking to me.
This is a global Telling prepaid call from Grant Hayes. Hello?
Hey, Grant?
Yes.
It's Juju Chang at ABC News.
This is a global Telling prepaid call from Grant Hayes.
After Grant's trial and conviction, many questions remain unanswered, like what happened in that apartment. So we arranged to speak with him from prison. But his claims about how Laura died doesn't really add up. Grant, can you hear me? It's Juju Chang at ABC News. Thanks so much for calling.
Thank you for picking up.
So let me ask you this. People have described you as very charming, but also manipulative and even scary.
I don't really have any defense for what people think about my character. But, you know, I'm not in prison for being a bad person. I'm in prison for killing a woman. And that didn't happen.
So you're saying you didn't kill Laura?
No, I didn't kill Laura.
So what happened that night in the apartment? How did she die?
From what I was told, when I left the room, she had asked to hold our 5-week-old baby, and Amanda had refused her. And Amanda told me that Laura had actually grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back, and that she had swung back with her elbow, hit her, dislodged herself from her, and ran into my recording studio. And when I came back in the room, Laura was laid out.
I just want to get this straight, Grant. You're blaming Laura for her own death?
Laura attacked a woman. I don't know any other way to look at it.
And so, at that point, why not call 911 to try to resuscitate her?
I was freaked out. Honestly, I was afraid. I was very, very afraid.
And then you're captured on video buying a saw. Who came up with that plan?
Well, Amanda had a plan to take Laura's body to a swamp at her sister's in Texas. And we had to get it out of the house, and the only way we could do that was if it were dismembered. So I guess you could say it was carrying out a plan that was Amanda's.
It's only been a few months since Grant's conviction, and now Amanda Hayes' trial is set to begin.
In Amanda's trial, we're still putting forward the same evidence as Grant's trial, but at the same time, we want to accent Amanda's role in everything.
The defense was trying to show Amanda she was coerced by Grant and only did what Grant said in order to protect herself and her child.
But Amanda isn't just sitting there idly. She is an active participant in everything that we see. In Texas, there was a camera trying to catch people illegally dumping or littering, and it captures exactly that.
Where are we in relation to where her sister's house is and where the body parts were found?
We're just a mile and a half down. At my particular unit, we were in charge of environmental crimes. At that time, the camera was set up right where you see these two trees. Saw something was odd in the photos. The female that got out of the truck started unloaded boxes and jugs and started shoving them under the tree in this fence line right behind me. She was shoving it into the bushes. And then I found some boxes of acid. Seemed really strange. And I had watched the news the night before showing her court appearance in Raleigh.
And so how did you put that two and two together?
They looked the same, looked like the same lady. It was kind of really basic.
People look at that and say, she doesn't look like she's under duress. She doesn't look like she's afraid.
A picture can tell 1,000 words, but it can hide 1,000 words too.
What do you think that picture was hiding?
I think that picture shows a still frame of a woman thinking she's out in the middle of nowhere in the country and just trying to hurry up, get it over with, get it done.
And my question is, if you are driving a vehicle down the road, dumping evidence, and you are so scared, keep driving. Go to the police, go somewhere for help.
The one difference between these two trials, we found out Amanda would testify.
I think the defense had decided that if she went on the stand, she had a way of projecting innocence.
Right now we're going to begin with the North Carolina trial of a woman accused of killing the mother of her stepchildren.
Taking the stand for the first time this week, Amanda Hayes' defense was simple.
I was just doing whatever he told me to do.
Her husband made her do it.
How would you describe her? Strong, poised, well-rehearsed, but in a very sweet, almost sing-songy baby voice.
Amanda, did you kill Laura Ackerson?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you help Grant kill Laura Ackerson?
I absolutely did not.
Were you present when Grant killed Laura Ackerson?
No, sir, I was not.
Grant told me that Amanda killed Laura in self-defense, but Amanda says it began with an accident.
The picture that Amanda paints inside that apartment on the night of the murder has Laura bumping into Amanda as Amanda is holding their newborn baby, and describes Laura falling to the ground.
Amanda Hayes says she had no idea Laura Ackerson had died after Ackerson was injured at the Hayes-Raleigh apartment. She says she left with the children when Ackerson fell and hit her head.
I think she hurt her own credibility by telling these implausible stories about she came back after a couple of hours and had no idea that Laura had been killed and her body disposed of. You can't even do all that in a couple of hours.
This is a small apartment. Dismembering somebody takes a lot of things. Seems hard to believe that your mother didn't know.
It seems hard. It does seem hard to wrap your head around. It does.
I know you love your mom. I know you support her. Could it be that you're seeing it through rose-colored glasses?
Absolutely.
And that perhaps she was more involved than you'd like to believe?
Nobody will ever know what they don't know.
She also testified that her husband threatened to kill her if she didn't help dispose of the body.
He told me that that I had to help figure out how to get rid of this body, or else none of us were making it back to North Carolina, to Raleigh.
Did it ever seem to you like she could have also been a victim of Grant Hayes?
You know, I feel like there's a possibility that Amanda was a victim of Grant's charisma, Grant's narcissism. But beyond that, I don't believe that she was a victim of anything.
No one knows what that relationship's like, but and those pictures on Amanda's camera reflect Amanda having a good time and smiling the whole time.
Amanda Hayes is a former bit part performer who attended acting school in New York, but according to one of the prosecutors, none of her acting jobs were as good as the one she gave in this courtroom.
She has given the performance of her life.
She came across as sympathetic. She came across as, Grant's the controlling jerk, and I just got swept up in all this.
We're asking that you find her not guilty on both charges.
But would the jury believe Amanda?
We may never know what kind of verdict Amanda Hayes expected. If it was something different than what she got, her face didn't show it.
And what does Grant make of it all?
Laura's death killed me.
You're saying essentially that you're the victim in all of this.
The last night that I was with Grant, he handed me a notepad with these pages on it. Told me that it was important lyrics and that it was going to be worth money one day. But this was probably the most unsettling of the poetry that I found. I guess it's one sentence with the word murder in it 6 times. It's murder, 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 murder in my veins, murder in my soul, desertless in my heart, but to let this all go. And I think that's what just really upset me a little bit and had goosebumps when I read that for the first time after finding out about Laura.
Dramatic testimony in a first-degree murder case. Did her husband force her to cover up his crime?
It will be up to the jury to decide if Amanda Hayes was his accomplice or another victim.
It's time for Amanda to face justice. They wanted Amanda found responsible for her role in the death of Laura to the tune of first-degree murder.
It is the unanimous verdict of the jury that the defendant is guilty of murder in the second degree.
Amanda was convicted of the lesser charge of second-degree murder, and she was sentenced to between 13 and 17 years in a North Carolina prison.
They were both there. They both had the opportunity to save Laura's life. Neither one of them did it, so to me that makes them both guilty of first-degree murder.
What was your reaction to the verdict against your mom?
It was a glimpse of hope.
Why is that?
Because it wasn't life with no chance of parole.
Amanda is later tried and convicted in Texas for tampering with evidence, resulting in an additional 20 years in prison. What does justice look like for her?
I think more of it is, what does justice look like for Laura and those little boys?
Who actually delivered a death blow? I don't know if Grant did it or if Amanda did it. The fact is, this husband and wife collaborated to kill this woman.
Despite being convicted for killing Laura, Grant remains steadfast in defending his image. It doesn't sound to me like you have a lot of remorse about Laura's death.
Let me tell you something about my remorse and Laura's death. Laura's death killed me, killed my family. So I think I'm the most remorseful person. I am the one who everyone points at and says, he did this. He's the bad guy. He's the monster under the bed. It's just not true.
You're saying essentially that you're the victim in all of this.
No. Amanda and Lillian were the victims.
What, if any, regrets do you have in this whole matter?
I regret that we took her body apart. Ooh. It just colors the way that people are going to see me for the rest of my life.
When you think about Laura, what comes to mind?
I talked to her. I ask her to always watch over all of the kids. And I tell her thank you for watching over me.
Today, all 3 of Grant's children are being raised by his own mother. The kids have no contact with Grant or Amanda.
Those boys were Laura's life. She was doing everything to have a better life for them. She was a wonderful mother. She loved her boys more than anything, more than her own life.
We should point out tonight that Grant Hayes has filed several appeals. All have been denied. He tells 2020 he's continuing to fight for freedom.
Meanwhile, his ex-wife, David, Amanda, is in a Texas prison serving out her conviction. She declined to be interviewed. That's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Deborah Roberts.
And I'm David Muir from all of us here at ABC News in 2020. Good night.
To look into the death of a young wife.
That Atlanta wife murdered as she opened her very own front door. An all-new 2020 starts right now.
This is a true murder mystery. Emphasis on murder, emphasis on mystery.
I felt like Lita's murder case looks like a true crime story, but it goes a lot deeper.
Who would kill this woman? She wasn't robbed. Somebody came to the door with roses and shot her dead.
Was there a feeling that this had to be pretty calculated?
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
No obvious suspect.
Was she at all concerned about the fact that she was in an interracial marriage and that this was a difficult time in the South?
It was not a welcoming place for a black woman to live.
She said, I'm done. I'm packing up my stuff.
I want you to see the puzzle. When I put it together and I show it to you, you'll never forget it.
Your wife's best friend has been murdered, and police are looking at you. It's a chilly, drizzly winter Atlanta morning, and 35-year-old Lita McClinton is suddenly awakened.
It's around 8:15 in the morning, and she heard the doorbell ring. And she tightens up her rope and goes downstairs to open the door.
And I think she was probably not going to open it, but she looked through the keyhole and saw that the person had a box of flowers.
There was a man standing at the door, holding a long white box of long stem roses that had a big, thick pink ribbon around it.
So she receives the flowers, thinking that this is a delivery.
She was really excited. She thought that it was a gift from one of her friends.
In a sea of red brick townhouses, Lita's white one stands out. Her best friend Poppy and 3-year-old daughter have spent the night, and they are still in bed upstairs, just waking up.
Poppy hears her say, "Good morning," to the man at the door.
The flower delivery man produces a handgun. He fires a shot.
She actually put the box of roses in front of her face. The second shot went right through the center of her head, and she fell with a large thud.
Lita's friend Poppy was upstairs with her toddler, and right away she grabbed her daughter and hid her into a closet and said, "You gotta be quiet as a mouse." She didn't know if the gunman was gonna come for her. Lita's neighbor hears the shots, then sees the guy running like a bat out of hell, just booking it out of the complex, and he calls 911.
The first police officer is only a few blocks away, and he gets the call, and so that police officer ends up holding Lita's hand. They thought Lita was completely unconscious, and yet she managed to squeeze his hand as he kept comforting her and telling her everything was going to be okay. And he said it was her comforting him. Poppy got out of the closet and called Lita's mother, and she couldn't get words out, and she finally just said, "Lita's been shot." Lita's mother called her husband. When they went to the hospital, they were put in a separate little waiting room. The doctor tended to Lita. He came out about 30 minutes later and said, "I'm sorry."
It was just so profoundly sad because Lita just drew people in. She had a lot of friends, and she was a good person.
Lita was a really wonderful young lady, the kind of person that would give you the shirt off her back.
How did her parents take it?
Oh, they were torn up.
It'll never get easier because she's gone. We should have gone first, not her.
Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood is known for its sprawling mansions, not murder. So when the shooting happened right here, neighbors were shocked and on edge.
Sullivan was found in the doorway of her townhouse, shot twice in the head.
It's pretty surprising that in this area, those kinds of things probably wouldn't happen.
How did you learn that Lita had been killed?
I ran to the TV because I heard Sullivan on Slayton Drive.
Police say a box of roses was found near her body. The gunman apparently posed as a delivery man.
And I said, "Oh my God, that's Lita."
Detectives on the scene found a bullet fragment, 2 shell casings, and the box of roses.
2 gunshots from a 9mm penetrated the box. The weapon was never found. To this day, it's never been found.
In this case, you had just a minor amount of evidence.
At the time, it was the top story on the news, and law enforcement officers felt a great deal of pressure in order to bring Lita's killer to justice.
For years, Lita's case was cold, buried underneath the weight of unanswered questions and fading memories.
I'm Deb Miller-Landau, and I just wrote a book called A Devil Went Down to Georgia about the murder of Lita McClinton Sullivan. I covered this story for Atlanta Magazine back in 2004, and the more people I talked to, the more that I researched, the more I felt like I began to know Lita. So talking about the day that she died feels personal.
The case was also personal to Clint Rucker, the prosecutor. When I came to Atlanta to meet up with him, I learned that one of his passions is puzzles, working from the outside in, which also translates to solving homicides. Where do you begin? How do you start to connect?
When I'm putting together a puzzle, not only in real life, but also a murder case, I make an assessment about what it is I'm working with. I start to identify pieces of the puzzle that are foundational.
Lita's murder case looks like a true crime story, but it goes a lot deeper. It's a story about love and loss and greed.
Lita had been reared in Atlanta's Black Elite.
On the surface, she was living an Atlanta dream.
A prosperous upbringing.
A very prosperous upbringing. The expectations for her life were pretty high.
Black women have had to be exceptional in order to be seen. And that was the case then, and I think it's still the case now.
One thing seems certain. A murder of this kind is personal.
Was there a feeling that this had to be pretty calculated?
Police knew almost immediately Lita Sullivan was the intended victim.
Who would kill this woman? She wasn't robbed. Somebody came to the door with roses and shot her dead.
Atlanta had its fair share of crime, but this was most certainly one of the highest profile cases that got reported in the news.
Sullivan was shot twice in the head. A box of roses found next to her body.
Using a flower delivery man and shooting her, it was something that just kind of stuck out to me.
Atlanta, Georgia, billed as a vibrant melting pot, a destination for creatives. But if you grew up in Georgia in the 1970s, as I did, you know this was a very different place then. One still emerging from the dark shadows of segregation and racial tensions. What was 1970s Atlanta like when she was sort of coming along?
We've got African Americans that are kind of ascending into really prominent positions. Lita also is ascending because her parents are part of this movement.
Lita's parents, Emory and Joanne McClinton, were both power players, movers and shakers in Atlanta.
Emory McClinton was on the State Board of Transportation. Joanne McClinton was a member of the Georgia legislature.
Joanne will tell you stories about being in really interpersonal meetings with Dr. King.
She was the Maynard Jackson's campaign manager when he ran for mayor.
I think the McClintons had high expectations for who Lita would become. Lita Sullivan was a true daughter of Atlanta.
She was just a gem, very, very proper.
And she had grown up in a world of cotillions, so she really was sort of that classic upper crust black person growing up in Atlanta.
She knew where she was going.
She had a great sense of style.
And absolutely charming.
After high school, she went on to Spelman College. Her parents sort of hoped that she would enter the political arena like they were, but she was very much into fashion. She was working at a boutique at Lenox Square, and in walks this guy who had unruly curls and weird glasses and just immediately saw Lita and was taken with her.
Fresh out of college, 24-year-old Lita is smitten with James, Jim Sullivan. He's a bit older, 35, and he's also white.
He showered her with gifts. He just completely showered her with attention.
He comes in, he dazzles her. What did you learn about him?
I learned that what he saw was a fantasy in Lita. I think he looked at her as a young, very attractive, very smart African-American female.
Another big difference between them is class. Lita has been raised in Atlanta's high society and Jim on Boston's gritty South Side.
He grew up in a very middle to lower middle class environment.
He went to Holy Cross College, got a bachelor's degree in economics.
He always wanted more for himself. He always wanted to be a rich person, but it didn't seem like that was in the cards. He was an accountant. He was working hard, but he really wasn't getting ahead.
But life is about to change for Jim Sullivan when he inherits a thriving liquor distributorship from his uncle, worth millions of dollars.
Crown Beverages was worth around $3.2 million. Jim had become a wealthy man. So when the McClintons met Jim for the first time, they were like, who is this guy? He had this kind of manner that was very uncouth and brash, and they were sort of mystified about what their daughter saw in him. I mean, I think the only thing they had in common was that he was Catholic and they were Catholic as well. But everything else was complete polar opposites.
Another concern, of course, was race. Remember, this is the 70s. Even though the country is watching color barriers slipping away on the hit show The Jeffersons, with Primetime's first interracial couple.
Your parents have never gotten over the fact that I'm white.
That's because you never got over being white.
At that time, this was unusual.
Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws that forbade blacks and whites to marry had only been repealed 10 years earlier.
Still, despite their obvious differences, Jim Sullivan pops the question to Lita.
So the McClintons were like, you cannot marry this man.
They felt like Lita was really making a mistake and was kind of caught up in the exuberance of this relationship.
Despite her parents' strong objections, Lita and Jim are engaged. But on the eve of her wedding, Jim drops a bomb.
He tells Lita that he has been married before and that he has 4 children. Lita was shocked.
And then, the very same night, Jim Sullivan blindsides his bride-to-be again.
He whips out a piece of paper and he says, "Can you sign this?" And then she looks down and sees that he's drawn up a prenuptial agreement. And she's like, what is this?
Apparently determined to protect his newfound wealth, Sullivan surprises Lita with a prenup, which says that in the event of a divorce, she would walk away with virtually nothing. She's reluctant, but the cake is ordered, the flowers are ready, so Lita signs the agreement and ties the knot anyway.
Lita got married in 1976. It was a small ceremony in Macon, Georgia. Joanne McClinton would later describe that as the worst day of her life.
The newlyweds settle some 80 miles south of Atlanta near Jim's business in Macon. It's a world away from Atlanta. But Lita agrees to give up her current job and her income and become full-time Mrs. Jim Sullivan.
They bought a house in Shirley Hills, a very affluent, very white part of Macon. Joanne and Emery McClinton feared for their daughter. Being part of an interracial couple in Macon, Georgia in the 1970s would have been extraordinarily challenging. The neighbors were like, you have the gall to bring a black wife to Shirley Hills. People threw garbage on their doorstep.
The out-and-out racism had to be tough for Lita. But she moves forward and makes some new connections and friends, including Yvette Miller.
When Lita and Yvette occasionally go out to eat, she notices something a bit curious.
We'd go out to lunch at a nice restaurant, and she couldn't pay the bill. And I would end up picking up the check.
And they were a wealthy couple.
They were very wealthy.
Then one Christmas season, a card arrives in the mail addressed to Jim. Lita opens it, and what she discovers will make her question everything. Lita and Jim Sullivan's first few months of marriage seemed to be going well.
They were both intelligent, both attractive, definitely upper class, high society.
But just beneath the surface, there's some obvious cracks.
They seemed to be loving at first.
At first?
He was not that nice to her, and he was not that kind to her.
Was he brusque? Was he brash?
He was a bit arrogant. Even though he had all of these resources, he did not, in my opinion, take care of his wife.
Friends say that the once generous millionaire has suddenly become a miser.
He was notoriously cheap.
He would wear his dead uncle's clothes around the house. He would use the sheath from the dry cleaning as saran wrap in the kitchen. He didn't want Lita to work, but he kept her on a very tight allowance where he gave her $150 a week.
Did she express any discontentment with her marriage?
When we were at those restaurants, Jim just does not give me enough money to take care of me and the house. You know, she clearly was not happy.
Was there talk of infidelity?
Lita had several instances where she questioned whether or not her husband was actually having an affair.
One day she finds a long blonde hair in their master bathroom, and she asks Jim about it, and he says, "I don't know what you're talking about." They got into this cycle of, she accused him of philandering. He would deny it, and then he would buy her sort of an expensive jewelry apology.
Then, during the holidays one year, Lita makes another stunning discovery.
A Christmas card came addressed to Jim. She opened it. A woman wrote in something like, missing your kisses. The woman's return address was on the envelope, so Lita went and spoke to her. And the woman said that she had been having an affair with Jim.
Lita is distraught and goes home to be with her parents in Atlanta. But her husband manages to lure her back, increasing her weekly allowance in a now post-nuptial agreement.
Now it's $300 instead of $150 a week, but it still shows that all of their assets belong to Jim.
That's right, the successful business, Lita's Mercedes, multiple properties, even her jewelry, still belong to her husband in the event of a divorce.
But in an attempt at reconciliation, Lita signs the postnup.
Just a few months after Lita signs that agreement, without Lita knowing, Sullivan decides to sell Crown Beverages for $5 million.
And that's not all. He tells her they're moving to Palm Beach, Florida.
Lita was in shock.
She had any clue that he was going to whistle her down to Palm Beach.
But Lita's new Florida home, located a stone's throw from what would become Mar-a-Lago, is more elaborate than she ever would have imagined. Called Casa Alita. It's a 17,000 square foot mansion with 8 oceanfront bedrooms.
It was just unbelievable.
When you went to Jim's home, you go through this tunnel and you would be at the beach. It's your own private beach.
But for Lita, everything that glitters isn't exactly gold.
James Sullivan very much wanted to integrate himself into the upper echelons of society, and his aspirations did not include Lita's participation.
It was not a welcoming place for a black woman to live. And when he found out that to sort of scale the level of social plateau he was looking at in Palm Beach, having a black wife was a serious impediment to that.
She was left out of some affairs, and she really became upset.
So even though they had money, this is a moneyed crowd, didn't really matter though.
He was barely rich compared to Palm Beach.
Did he want to be in that crowd?
Oh, yes. He wanted to, be accepted as one of the rich and famous.
It doesn't take long before Jim starts to flirt with other women.
And it's at a cocktail party that one particularly elegant Palm Beach woman catches Sullivan's eye.
Jim sees Suki Rogers, who is a Korean-born socialite.
She was telegenic. She had a spicy personality. I think a man like Jim Sullivan could not help but be intrigued by this beautiful woman.
They started dating. He's still married to Lita.
By now, the Sullivans have been married nearly 10 years, but things are about to explode.
Lita finds women's lingerie in their master bed. It's the bra that broke the camel's back.
She said, I'm done. I'm packing up my stuff, and I'm going back home.
Lita arrives back in Atlanta. The very next day, she files for divorce from Jim.
But Sullivan fights Lita every step of the way, and the divorce drags on.
Did she seem concerned, worried, nervous about her breakup?
What I detected was she was excited, and she was cutting the cord and leaving Jim alone. She wanted her life back.
While Lita is looking forward to a new life of freedom, she can't be happy about the prospect of leaving her marriage with virtually nothing. No career, no Palm Beach mansion, no Buckhead townhouse, and $2,500 a month in alimony for 3 years. So Lita is going to divorce court, determined to fight for what she believes she deserves.
All she wanted was a reasonable financial settlement so that she could kind of go on with her life.
January 16th, 1987 was set up to be a pivotal day in the lives of Lita and Jim Sullivan.
A judge was going to decide whether or not to throw out the postnuptial agreement.
She might get as much as close to $1 million in cash and assets.
The morning of January 16th, Lita Sullivan, she'd lose her life that day in a murder.
With Lita out of the picture, Jim Sullivan stands to gain the property that they had and retain control over all his money.
Sullivan was the main suspect.
That is, until a treasure trove of secret recordings of Lita's private conversations are uncovered, taking this investigation in a whole new direction. And police are looking at you.
You know, you make a big circle and you put everybody in it that's close to Lita. Everybody's a suspect. But the first one would be the husband.
The first and obvious suspect was James Sullivan, who stood to gain everything from her death, all the property, all the monies, and who was contesting the divorce.
Detectives went down to speak to him in Palm Beach, and they put him through a polygraph.
Jim Sullivan not only passes the polygraph, but there's something else. He has an alibi that puts him nearly 700 miles away from the crime scene.
James Sullivan was actually in Palm Beach at the time of Lita's murder.
When you first look at it, it looks pretty cut and dry. When you interview all the people involved, everybody points in one direction, towards the husband. But when you sit down and look at the facts, I'm not so sure that the husband is the person that committed the crime.
Nothing surfaced in the early stages of the investigation that implicated Jim Sullivan in the murder.
Sullivan is cooperating with authorities, and during his interview with detectives, he mentions the name of his friend, Marvin Marable.
At the time of Lita's death, Marvin and James Sullivan had a very close relationship.
Remember, Marvin Marable is married to Lita's best friend, Poppy, who was in the Buckhead townhouse with her 3-year-old daughter the morning that Lita was murdered. But back before the shooting, the friendship hadn't always sat well with Marvin.
When Lita moved back to Atlanta, they started, hanging out together.
So she's disillusioned by her relationship. Did her failed relationship have any impact on your relationship?
Well, from the standpoint of them, being together all the time and going out, yeah.
Commiserating.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly didn't help. And I can understand her being there for her friend, but, sometimes you can go overboard, which is what happened in our relationship.
Marable, a former New York State trooper turned entrepreneur, says Lita would often spend hours at his home with Poppy. And it was during this time, he says, coincidentally or not, that his own marriage began to unravel.
I found a letter where Poppy was planning to file for divorce.
So she was planning to file for divorce without your knowledge?
Oh, yeah.
That had to be a shocker.
It was.
So then you decided to try something a little questionable after that.
I have a background in law enforcement. I don't see it as questionable. It's your own telephone in your own house. I put a recorder on the, people call it a tap, on the phone, and I started recording conversations.
In the house phone?
Mm-hmm. On the house phone.
He began listening to Poppy and Lita's conversations and ended up recording more than 300 hours.
And during those very personal conversations between girlfriends, Marvin Marable learns that there may be some information that James Sullivan might be interested in learning that will be helpful for him in his divorce case.
He tells Sullivan about the tapes and what's on them, specifically Lita's post-divorce plans.
And soon enough, the two disgruntled husbands are conspiring to get the best of their soon-to-be ex-wives in divorce court.
Marvin Maribel travels down to Palm Beach under a false name, and the two men listen to the tapes, and Marvin says, I'm not going to record anymore, and Jim says, no, keep recording.
Was there talk of money?
Yeah, he offered $30,000.
Jim says to Marvin, if the judge decides to honor the postnuptial agreement, he's going to give Marvin $30,000 for the use of the information on the tapes.
What kinds of things did Lita talk about that could be helpful to either one of you?
You know, there were some guys that, she would talk to, but she was legally separated.
But then, just a few days after Marvin and Jim's secret meeting at Casa Elita,
Poppy and Lita somehow discovered the recording device.
How did they react?
It wasn't nice. She filed for divorce the next day.
She was angry.
She was very angry.
Lita was upset too. So upset that she reported Marvin to the authorities, and he was charged with possession of an eavesdropping device. So when police questioned Sullivan about who might have a motive to murder his wife, he tells them to look no further than Marvin Maribel.
And sure enough, only a few days after Lita's death, Marvin is being questioned by the Atlanta Police Department about Lita's murder.
I go down for the interview, and the first thing they did is read me my rights. And from there on, it was just a nightmare. I was a prime suspect.
You have a law enforcement background, so you knew what police
So I knew that I was being followed. I could pick the investigators, police, could pick them out all the time. Jim had mentioned my name to them. He said, look at Marvin Merrill.
This was serious stuff.
Oh, yeah.
How worried were you?
I was very worried.
Joanne and Emery McClinton were beyond devastated. Their eldest daughter was dead. Just 3 days after Lita's murder, they held a funeral.
Days dissolve into months, and authorities are no closer to finding Lita Sullivan's murderer.
The case is just sort of growing colder and colder by the minute.
And while Marvin Maribel might have been angry at Lita for pressing those charges against him for eavesdropping, there was no evidence he was responsible for her death.
I know that people get wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and so the only saving grace is the fact that I knew I was innocent.
By process of elimination is you can determine the pieces that don't fit.
And just eliminate them.
The way in which we eliminated Marvin Maribel as a suspect. There was just not enough to connect him directly to the crime itself.
As for that eavesdropping device charge, Marvin was put on probation, which he completed, and then he was exonerated. But on those recordings Maribel made, Lita had talked about other men, something that her soon-to-be ex-husband Sullivan pointed out to police.
He made allegations that she was participating in extramarital affairs, and that perhaps this was the action of, a disgruntled boyfriend.
We have a lot of major players. At this point in the investigation, we have a lot of suspects.
One of the first men police question is a professional athlete.
Lita and him had been friends when she was in Palm Beach. The police quickly found out that he was in prison for drug possession.
That athlete is behind bars when Lita is killed, so clearly he can't be the trigger man. Then investigators turn their sights to a prominent Atlanta businessman.
And he and Lita had been childhood friends, and they sort of rekindled their friendship. And they realized that he had no motive, and they found nothing that connected him.
Authorities also take a hard look at another suitor who had taken Lita to dinner the night before her death, and get this, had also given her 2 roses.
The suspect was a man named Bob Daniel, and Bob had had an incident a couple months before the murder where, in a drunken rage, he came to Lita's house, smashed his car into the garage, And as the cops were taking him away, he said, "I'm going to kill that." So, serious red flag.
But that lead didn't go anywhere either.
Bob had just had quadruple bypass surgery. The police ultimately decided that Bob had nothing to do with it.
It's the unknowing that makes it so difficult. And to know that there are individuals who may be walking around now planning and plotting to do the same thing to somebody else is abhorrent to me.
I remember having the impression it was like a festering wound for them.
The McClintons want to draw attention to a $25,000 reward in the case.
The cause of finding justice for Lita became their obsession, became their passion.
The reward is for the arrest and conviction of those individuals responsible for our daughter's murder.
To catch Lita's killer, the Atlanta Police Department assigns 2 veteran detectives to the case.
If Lieutenant Walker bears a resemblance to actor Billy D. Williams, Welcome Harris reminds one of Columbo, the dogged, disheveled detective of television fame.
Building a murder case was like making a mosaic. You get a shiny piece of glass here, a gem there. You put it together and you hope that from it emerges the shimmering image of a killer.
This particular case deals with what I consider to be high society. It contains a little bit of everything. Intrigue, mystery.
These days, a lot of murders are solved using DNA technology, ring camera technology. But back then, it was detective work.
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
Most important thing found at the crime scene was the roses.
They canvassed all the area flower shops and quickly found that the roses had been purchased at the Botany Bay flower shop.
They interviewed the worker in there, and he told them that this guy came in about 8 o'clock and bought these roses and paid in cash and then left. And he was in a small car.
The florist gave a description of the man buying the flowers and another man who was waiting in the car.
So detectives know they're looking for at least 2 men.
Until yet another person is described to police. That flower delivery man who had looked Lita's neighbor right in the eye.
There was a next-door neighbor of Lita's, lived over on the right side of her condo. He lived there. His name was Bob Christensen.
He actually gave a description of the flower delivery man as a Caucasian, middle-aged man.
They went down to the police station and worked with a police artist and got sketches. As the sketches were being completed, the officers were realizing, obviously, that the shooter was not Jim Sullivan and that the other individuals were all 3 distinct individuals. They didn't look anything like each other, so therefore we knew 3 people were involved.
For investigators, this has all the earmarks of only one thing: murder for hire.
All the evidence pointed to a hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, and firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
With investigators now exploring the possibility that Lita was murdered by a hired gunman, another critical piece of evidence comes to light: a mysterious phone call.
And what they found was that on the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call that was placed from a payphone right outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Was this a call from the killer?
I don't know about you. I haven't had a collect call from a payphone. So as a cop, you probably go, I wonder if that's connected.
And a tip from a woman 700 miles away may just be the big break investigators have been waiting for.
I said, anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
A hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
You figure out what fits and what doesn't fit.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent.
The loss of a daughter.
They still don't have a murder weapon.
But they do have witnesses.
Do you know anybody who can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
Anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers.
You actually brought in a doorbell. Why?
To have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder. She's about to meet her maker.
It's a deadly delivery of a dozen pink roses. 35-year-old Lita McClinton Sullivan opens her front door and is suddenly gunned down.
On the year anniversary of Lita's death, there are no named suspects. They still don't have a murder weapon. They don't have a hitman. They don't have a paper trail that ties Jim or anyone else to a hit.
But that's about to change when they get Jim Sullivan's phone records.
On the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour or so after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call to James Sullivan's home in Palm Beach, Florida.
It turns out to be from a rest stop in Swanee, Georgia, maybe 30 or 40 miles from Buckhead. Using a phone call to call another state, that opens up federal jurisdiction. In this case, that's the FBI.
We believed the phone call from Swanee Rest Stop to his home in Palm Beach, Florida, was sufficient indication that a contract hitter may have called him after doing the job.
Enter Special Agent John Kingston, who takes a particular interest in that phone call and a whole slew of other calls Jim Sullivan made and received around the time of Lita's murder.
I got a whole year's worth, 6 months before the murder to 6 months after the murder.
Kingston notices a few calls, and one of them was to Bob Christensen, Lita's neighbor. When Kingston talks to Bob, he finds out that Jim had called Bob 3 days before the murder.
Sullivan said, had he seen anything suspicious around Lita's townhouse?
And Bob finds it strange. He hasn't talked to Jim in over a year.
Bob Christensen shares something else with Agent Kingston. On the same day Jim Sullivan called him, 3 days before the fatal flower delivery, Lita heard a loud knock on her door at 5 or 6 in the morning. It was so early and so unnerving, she didn't answer it.
So that made the call that he got from Jim even more suspicious.
Kingston also finds that a call is made between Jim's house and a Howard Johnson's motel in Atlanta, just a couple of miles from Lita's house. This is really strange. One thing that he's learned about Jim is that he's not a Hojo's kind of guy. So he goes to the Howard Johnsons and asks if he can look through the records.
They gave me the shoebox with all the registration cards, and I pick out 3 that I thought, well, these are awfully interesting. So I said, do you guys have the phone records? They said, yeah, sure we do. And I'm thinking, boy, these people keep really good records, and they keep them for a long time, and I'm really glad. They bring me the phone records for January 13th. I'm flipping through them, and all of a sudden I see 305 Palm Beach, South Florida area code. And I'm pretty sure it's Jim's number. And so I check my records real quick, and I go, yep, that's his number. And then I look, and I said, oh, look, it's from 518. That's one of the 3 cards I pulled out. Well, it just so happens I have a copy of it here. And one of the things it imparts is 3 individuals checked into the room. The individual who actually registered used the name Johnny Furr. But 3 individuals is important to me because I think 3 people involved in the crime. They put their car down as a Toyota 85 with a North Carolina plate. We believe that a Toyota was the getaway car for the murder. So there's two coincidences already.
But remember, these motel records are from January 13th. Lita was murdered 3 days later on the 16th. Special Agent Kingston is beginning to surmise that the killers may have tried and failed to get to her once before.
What I believe it to be is the killers having come down 3 days before the actual murder was committed, knocking on her door, her not answering it, and them having to stop and regroup and figure out what plan B is going to be. So I am in love with this registration card and becomes the focal point of my life for the next several months.
Kingston's next move is to locate this so-called Johnny Furr with the North Carolina license plate.
And to my surprise, there are 150 John or Johnny Furrs in North Carolina. But to my great surprise, 115 of these 150 are in a very small circle in North Carolina between the three cities of Albemarle, Concord, and Kannapolis.
They're going to knock on every door and find this Johnny Furr. Of course, they're coming from Georgia, and anytime the FBI goes and investigates in another state, they need that state's approval. And just as they're about to get to the state border, their boss calls them and says, North Carolina's denying you entry, and they'll take it from here.
And that pretty much kills my case. that kills my case.
Yeah, soon after that, Agent Kingston is transferred to another job, and that whole investigation just sort of fades away. Meantime, in Palm Beach, Jim and Suki are living the high life. So with Lita out of the picture, Jim is free to marry Suki, which he does 8 months after Lita's murder.
He's thinking that he's the cat's meow. Eating in restaurants in Palm Beach, going to parties, got another attractive woman on his arm.
Jim drives around town in a Rolls Royce and gets into a fender bender and has to go to traffic court. Jim says to the judge, well, you've misunderstood. I wasn't even driving that day. Suki was driving. So the judge says, we're going to throw it out. However, the cop who was on the scene catches wind, and he says Suki wasn't even in the car that day. It was Jim driving alone. So now Jim has perjured himself, as has Suki.
Jim ultimately got convicted of perjury, was given a year probation and a year of home confinement.
Suki Sullivan also receives a year of probation.
Suki's freaking out. When she gets charged with perjury on his behalf, she's like, I'm done with this. Suki files for divorce from Jim. And the trial that follows is the juiciest, craziest gossip in town. So when it's Suki's turn to testify, she drops a bomb.
Did he talk to you about his former wife, Lita?
Yes.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lita.
You can hear a pin drop. It's a big moment. After 33 months of marriage, Suki files for divorce from Jim.
Not surprisingly, it's another disputed divorce. But what might have been typical testimony about alimony takes a sudden turn in court.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lita.
He hired someone to rid of her.
I'm sorry?
He hired someone to rid of her.
She claimed that he confessed to her that he had Lita killed.
This became a bombshell in the investigation of the murder of Lita Sullivan.
Suki Sullivan's divorce testimony may be big news for the FBI, but it has zero impact on the divorce judgment, which favors her husband, Jim Sullivan, in nearly every way.
His divorce was complete, but his life full of turmoil was just beginning.
The opulent ocean-facing Palm Beach Palace may look like something out of The Great Gatsby, but while we watched, a new chapter in a crime story was unfolding.
We develop information here at WSB. There's going to be a raid on Jim Sullivan's Palm Beach mansion, and that is the biggest break in the Lita Sullivan case since the murder itself.
Investigators from the FBI, Atlanta Police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation were on the grounds of a mansion identified as that of James Sullivan.
All of a sudden, Jim Sullivan is clearly in the crosshairs of federal authorities.
They got a tip that Jim, now a convicted felon, has guns in the house. Of course, you're not allowed to have guns if you're a convicted felon. So they put together a sweeping affidavit to get a search warrant.
We did see a number of guns loaded into a car and this box carried out.
When they found the guns, he was in violation of his probation, and so he went to jail for 9 months.
All this time, a federal grand jury has been convening in Atlanta.
They've got what they found in the mansion. They got what they found in the phone records. They've got Suki Sullivan. They've got the neighbors. What they don't have are the identities of the hit team. There's a problem, though.
We, the federal government, have a 5-year statute of limitations, which is going to be up on January 16th of 92.
With 5 or 6 days to go before it expired, the U.S. attorney made a bold decision. We're going to take our best shot with what we got right now, so they indict Jim Sullivan.
Jim Sullivan is indicted on multiple counts of arranging Lita's murder for hire through interstate phone calls.
Millionaire James V. Sullivan is on trial in connection with an alleged murder for hire plot. Here he arrives for the first day of trial testimony.
It was a trial that transfixed Atlanta. I mean, it was something we were covering on basically a daily basis. But we couldn't have it on camera because it's federal court.
It looks like the family is finally going to have some accountability for the murder of their daughter, Lita.
The prosecution suggests the killers were calling Sullivan from the rest stop to say the job was done. The defense suggests otherwise.
Jim Sullivan is lawyered up with the best criminal defense lawyers that you can find anywhere in Atlanta and maybe in the whole country.
There is no evidence at this point in this case who placed that call or whether that call was placed by anyone connected with the crime.
The prosecutor spent 2 weeks telling their side of the story.
Suki, the woman he married months after Lita's death, delivered some of the most dramatic testimony the jury has heard.
They build what they feel like is a really strong case.
And then a big bombshell hits.
The judge says, I'm forced to dismiss this case for lack of evidence.
Judge Marvin Shube ruled that, in effect, even if Sullivan may have been involved in the murder for hire, the government fell short in proving the phone calls related to the murder.
This is one of the most difficult decisions I had to make because I firmly believe in the jury system.
And then he looks at Jim and he says, you've been acquitted.
This was ultra shocking.
Suddenly it's over, and Jim is a free man.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent. I had nothing to do with Lita's death. Her death was a great tragedy, and I thank God and my attorneys that this ordeal is over.
The family at that point, I guess, is just sort of at a loss. How devastating was that for them?
They felt like the justice system had let them down.
I was not expecting this. It's extremely difficult.
The system today is weighed in the favor of the defense.
James Sullivan seems to have gotten away with murder.
But Lita's parents aren't giving up.
They file a wrongful death suit in Palm Beach, Florida, and they win.
We, the jury, return the following verdict.
The jury deems that Jim is guilty of wrongful death.
Total damages of the estate of Lita McClinton Sullivan, $4 million.
But Sullivan is able to hide his assets and not pay any of the civil judgment.
Jim Sullivan appealed their civil judgment, and he won by having the Florida court say that they had filed it after the Florida statute of limitations.
Once again, Jim has wiggled out of any responsibility, and the family is left dumbfounded.
Until
a call is received out of the blue.
A young woman comes forward. It proved to be the break in the case that everyone was looking for.
"11 years have gone by since Lita Sullivan was gunned down on her doorstep when a tip comes in from a town 700 miles away.
A call is received out of the blue, and the individual calling is an attorney in Beaumont, Texas. He has a receptionist whose name is Belinda Trahan, who has told him a very unusual story about her boyfriend, Tony Harwood.
Belinda and Tony lived together in Albemarle, North Carolina, and he was a long-distance truck driver for North American Van Lines.
He basically drove a moving truck.
Belinda tells her boss about a time that Tony came home from a long-haul trucking trip and said that a rich white man in Florida offered to pay him to, quote, take care of his black wife in Georgia. At the time, Belinda didn't believe it. She thought he must be cheating on her.
Belinda thought that it was Tony just trying to get out of town and go down to Atlanta to the strip bars.
Until he took her to meet this rich white guy in a diner somewhere, and he got a wad full of money.
She says he sits down briefly in their booth and gives Tony Harwood the balance owed for the hit on the man's wife.
Belinda Trahan tells her boss that soon after this bizarre trip, she broke up with Tony Harwood and moved to Texas. But now, 11 years later, she says that he mysteriously reached out to her again, asking her to meet him at a nearby truck stop.
She's afraid that he may commit harm to her.
And it's this new tip from Belinda Trahan that sends Georgia authorities to the Lone Star State, turning up the heat on an otherwise cold case.
Georgia Bureau of Investigator Agent John Lang takes a detective from the Atlanta Police Department and goes down to Texas to talk to Belinda.
She was with Tony when they met this mysterious man at this diner that they were meeting at. We wanted to show her a lineup of pictures in hopes that she could pick Sullivan out of it.
And she takes her pink fingernail and taps right on Jim Sullivan's face and says, "This is the man."
My plan of attack was to get some recordings with her and Tony. So we got her to get in touch with Tony again.
She's talking to him and trying to coax information out of him, knowing John Lang is listening on her end. And Tony gives enough information that places him at the scene at the time.
We had the phone calls with Tony. She picked Jim Sullivan out of the lineup, but there was still more investigation to do. We really didn't know who Tony Harwood was.
John Lang knows that Tony worked at North American Van Lines. So he calls up North American Van Lines and he says, "Hey, you don't happen to have your records from 11 years ago?" And the guy says, "Yeah, there's some boxes full of files up in a musty attic. You're more than welcome to go poke around."
We went up into a hot attic and opened the first box that I went through. And about the third document I looked at was Jim Sullivan. His address was on it, Palm Beach, Florida. His signature was on it, and Tony Harwood's signature was on it.
He finds a bill of lading showing that Tony Harwood moved furniture for Jim Sullivan 2 months before the murder. And it's the paper trail he needs. It's like the jackpot.
Astounding. I don't know any other way to explain it. I mean, opened this box, and like the third record I look at, here it is. I mean, it just like it was meant to be.
On a Sunday morning in April of 1998, John Lang and local authorities go knock on Tony's door in Albemarle, North Carolina. Tony answers the door.
And he said, I've been waiting on you boys for a long time.
They take Tony to the Albemarle police station. Lang interviews Tony for 3 hours in this tiny room. But at the end of the day, Tony admits to taking money from Jim, $25,000, to take care of Lita. He also tells the detectives that he wasn't the one to pull the trigger, but that he was there the day of the murder.
He went through the whole case, and throughout the interview, he incriminated himself even more. I mean, admitted that he was there. He knew what happened. So he was arrested for murder of Lita Sullivan, and we took him back to Atlanta that day.
After Tony's arrest, things moved pretty quickly.
We are here today to announce the issuance of a warrant for the arrest of James V. Sullivan.
They got enough to get Sullivan. And now, boom, Sullivan hears of this and blows. He takes off.
We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
He's just gone. Vanished.
Investigators say he could be anywhere.
He is nowhere to be found.
We certainly do not know where Mr. Sullivan is. We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
More than a decade after his wife Lita was murdered, Jim Sullivan seems to be playing a game of catch me if you can with authorities.
There is an international manhunt for James Sullivan.
Well, Jim had moved to Costa Rica, actually bought a home there. In 1998, after an arrest warrant was issued for him, he immediately, like that night, went to Panama.
If you have any information concerning James Sullivan, you should contact the nearest U.S. Embassy or consulate.
We didn't know exactly where he had flown from Panama, and we didn't know exactly where he had gone.
His trail goes cold.
They put him on Interpol, and it was just cold.
They've tapped phone lines, anybody that he might have called, and he's called no one, not even his mother.
There was a few tips that came in. The tips are just dead ends.
The McClintons, they're dumbfounded that this guy could, get away again.
But in late 1999, with Sullivan still completely off the grid, the heartbroken Emery and Joanne McClinton do get some good news.
Last week came this, a court decision reinstating a $4 million judgment against Jim Sullivan in connection with a wrongful death case brought in effect by Lita's estate.
Lita's family and law enforcement officials hope that a renewed hunt for Sullivan's money will help smoke him out.
Where you find Sullivan's money, you're going to find him close by.
But even this goes nowhere.
Fast forward to 2002. There is no sign of Jim Sullivan.
We tried every effort in our arsenal to try and locate him, to put him on the FBI's wanted list, but to also put him on the top 10 list, which is very unusual. You don't get on the top 10 list very easily. Then we also featured him on America's Most Wanted.
The most recent picture we have of Sullivan is at least 5 years old, so the FBI age-enhanced this photo, which may bear a closer resemblance to Sullivan's appearance today. If you recognize James Sullivan from either of these photographs, call us now at 1-800-CRIME-TV.
A man sees America's Most Wanted on television and goes, I know that guy. He lives in my condo complex in Chiam, Thailand. And sure enough, he calls the authorities.
He went to Panama, to Venezuela, and eventually to Thailand, where he got a beachfront condo.
He spends his days walking on the beach, sitting by the pool, occasionally playing tennis, as though No other troubles in the world. The Thai police knock on Jim Sullivan's door on July 2nd, 2002, and say, "You're under arrest." The McClintons can hardly believe it.
We found out from the FBI, and that was a moment of jubilation.
15 years is a long time to concentrate on the loss of a daughter. And we had determination, and we had the will, and we also had all of these individuals behind us.
Almost as soon as Jim Sullivan is arrested for murder, Tony Harwood, who has continued to deny being the trigger man, agrees to a plea deal.
Tony kind of sees the writing on the wall.
Harwood just decided that he would plead guilty, the negotiated plea for manslaughter, and in turn that he would testify against Jim Sullivan.
It took 2 years, but he finally was extradited back to Atlanta in 2004.
He got off the plane. He was wearing a single shoe because he had such terrible gout in his foot. But he gets off and gets taken to Fulton County Jail. And there's this sort of cumulative sigh of relief.
To be clear, Sullivan being tried for murder in Georgia is not double jeopardy. For one thing, it is a state case, and the previous one was a federal case, and that specifically was for arranging Lita's murder for hire over the phone.
The elected district attorney appoints me along with a couple of other lawyers to prosecute the case.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
Right.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
There's no cutting corners, and you spread the pieces out, and then you figure out what fits and what doesn't fit. And that's kind of what the prosecution of James Sullivan was like. It was putting together all these different pieces so that we could make sure that the prosecution of the case was done accurately and with integrity.
What concerned you going into this trial?
He was rich. He was a white male. He had escaped the federal authorities before, and he had two of the best criminal defense attorneys representing him.
They are sharp, and if they can find a way out, they're going to find a way out.
There will not be one shred of physical evidence that links Jim Sullivan to this crime.
Jim has eluded justice so many times that there's a real palpable fear that he's going to get away with it, that he's going to elude justice again.
After nearly 20 years, Jim Sullivan is finally on trial here in Fulton County for the murder of his wife, Lita. For her heartbroken parents, this day couldn't come soon enough.
The pain, believe it or not, it increases. It does not decrease. The shock decreases. The depression decreases. But the pain continues.
It was an A-team of prosecutors, great courtroom performers.
Clint Rucker was the lead prosecutor, and Anna Grain, Kelly Hill, Sheila Ross.
And the evidence will show that the person who sent that hitman to Lita's door is the only person in the world who could have profited from her death. It is the only person in the world who met Tony Harwood and paid him off for killing her. And is the only person in the world who fled halfway around the world to avoid facing you.
Jury was 9 women and 3 men.
The jury is also racially mixed.
Jim Sullivan had Ed Garland and Don Samuel. Again, the people who won that big courtroom victory against the feds.
What the state relies on is 2 types of evidence. Circumstantial evidence, and then the testimony of con men.
The state initially started out the nature of the crime and what happened that morning.
I heard two sounds. They sounded to me like steel hitting steel.
I just didn't want to believe that it was a gun. And so I hesitated for a second, and then I really knew that it was a gun.
She was able to squeeze my hand each time I spoke with her, like she understood what I was saying. And for many, many years after this, I thought that's all it was. And then one day I realized that she was comforting me more than I was comforting her. That was the sort of lady I felt she was.
They had the phone calls that the FBI had found.
There was a call from this room to Mr. Sullivan's home at 7:44 in the morning.
But all this testimony notwithstanding, it's Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood who everybody wants to hear from.
Belinda Trahan was the most important witness in the case.
He told me that some white guy wanted to take out his black wife. I didn't believe it.
Why not?
I've been with him for 3 years, over 3 years. I mean, I figured he met someone because we were on the outs.
Most chilling about Belinda's testimony is that she confirms that there was at least one failed attempt on Lita's life.
She testifies that when Tony had gone to Lita's house on January 13th, that she didn't come to the door. They drove back to North Carolina and told Belinda that, it didn't work.
But Belinda testifies that hearing that from her boyfriend left her incredulous.
I said, just don't even lie to me. I said, because anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
Did you in any way mean for that to be a suggestion as to how to get the job accomplished?
No, not at all.
Here's Belinda Trahan, and she is falling on the sword about what she did.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers, and she admitted that on the stand.
You brought in the diner booth where they sat. Why couldn't you just tell the jury and show pictures?
I want you to see the puzzle once it's all put together. Yeah, I can show you the box. I can show you a photograph of it. But when I put it together and I show it to you, you'll never forget it.
Pushed the paper across the table like this, and then Tony put his hand on it and took it from there.
And there was a particular moment when she is asked to stand up in court and identifies the person she witnessed give Tony Harwood an envelope full of money.
Please, point him out.
It's right there. He can't even make eye contact.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, James Sullivan.
But if prosecutors feel like Belinda Trahan's testimony is helping their case, they have to know that it's just as big a risk to put Tony Harwood on the stand.
Can you show the jurors the body language Mr. Sullivan used and the tone of voice, if it's possible, that he used when he was explaining to you that his wife Lita was a problem?
You know, I've got this wife of mine up in Atlanta, and she is just trying to take everything I've got. And I don't know what to do about it. I need someone to take care of my problem. Do you know anybody that can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
We could prove Tony Harwood and James Sullivan actually met each other. So I spent the first part of Tony Harwood's examination confirming his signature on the hotel receipt.
And the signature, Johnny Kerr.
The fact that he actually went to the flower shop.
Who actually went inside the flower shop to purchase the flowers?
I did.
They had Tony Harwood saying that he was the one who made the collect call to Jim Sullivan's house.
What did you say to him?
I said, Merry Christmas. And he said, I understand. And that was it.
What were you trying to convey to Mr. Sullivan by giving him that signal? those code words.
That his problem was taken care of.
The defense had their chance to cross-examine Harwood. Not a single question. The two key witnesses were, of course, Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood. And so, in closing arguments, the defense assailed their credibility.
You should reject everything that came out of his mouth. Harwood says envelope in the bathroom. She says an envelope at this booth over here.
Garland presents to the jury a letter-sized envelope stuffed with bills. Harwood had said it was all cash in $20 bills.
See, oops, some of it fell out. There's some more. It won't fit in an envelope. The whole story just doesn't make sense.
In your closing arguments, you actually brought in a doorbell. Why? What was the point?
I wanted the jurors to have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder.
An ordinary moment.
In an ordinary moment. The second reason why I did it is because James Sullivan liked to read books. And one of his favorite authors wrote a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls.
I am going to ask you through your verdict of guilty to each and every count to tell James Vincent Sullivan for whom the bell tolls. Tell him that it tolls for thee. For you. For you.
And then I rang the doorbell 3 times.
As the jury goes out to deliberate, I think there's a real fear. Are they going to do it this time, or is it going to be like every other time?
I do not see this as a slam dunk for the state.
There's this anxiety. You're worried, but you're hopeful. I don't care who you talk to that does this kind of work as a litigator. They will tell you, oh, I can look at the jurors and I probably can tell you what they're going to do. No, you don't. You don't.
This is breaking news.
We do have breaking news at this hour. The jury having reached a verdict in the trial of Jim Sullivan.
The jury came back within a few hours on the same day.
It was so silent, and the tension was just palpable.
There's this anxiety. You don't know what it's going to be. You don't know how it's going to turn out. And you're worried, but you're hopeful.
It's hard not to think of Lita's family, her parents especially, after so many fits and starts to win justice for their firstborn child. It comes down to this moment.
The judge says,
"Ma'am, would you publish the verdict?"
And then from that moment until they get finished, nobody is breathing.
Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Vincent Sullivan, guilty of malice murder.
I got a chance to hug Emory McClinton. I had never been hugged so tight before. This was his baby. And we had finally, after 19 years, brought that man a sense of satisfaction. I'll never forget it. The conviction of James Sullivan was the biggest puzzle that I had solved in my career. And it is one that gave me the most satisfaction that I had ever experienced as a prosecutor.
The court hears victim impact statements. What a loss it was to have Lita gone from their lives.
I dream of Lita often. She is smiling and walking in my direction, and I in hers. But we never reach each other.
The jury came back and gave him life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I am so very pleased, and I'm happy. What we were waiting for was something and our judicial system something to happen and to bring it all together, and that's what you see today.
Why did it take 20 years, do you think?
It goes back to the resources.
He had privilege?
White privilege, completely. He knew how to manipulate people, and he had the resources to do that.
You've got a black victim, you've got a white defendant. Did race hover in this courtroom over this case at all?
I think in our criminal justice system, unfortunately, race always permeates throughout a case. But I'm thankful to say the evidence in the case overcame that racial component.
They never received any money. Is there money? Where is this money?
He's been able to secret his money. For the McClintons, seeing him rot in a prison in South Georgia brings them a whole lot more satisfaction.
This is a woman who you never met, I've never met, most of the people involved in this case never met her, and yet her life really made an impact. When somebody dies in this kind of manner, they don't stop being a member of the family, they don't stop being a member of the community, they never stop mattering. David, Tony Harwood was released from prison in 2018 after serving his 20-year sentence. Jim Sullivan remains behind bars with no possibility of parole.
As for the other two men who were seen at that flower shop, no one else was ever charged. That is our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
Bye.